The knock came at 6:47 in the evening on Christmas Eve. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock on the mantel, watching the second hand tick away another lonely holiday, when 3 firm raps on the front door made my heart stop completely. For 13 years I'd imagined that sound, dreamed it, prayed for it during countless sleepless nights. But now that it was real, echoing through my quiet house in Duluth, I found I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hand trembled as I set down the cup of chamomile tea I'd been nursing, the ceramic rattling against the saucer. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could make out a silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable, even after all these years. Snow was falling heavy outside, the kind of thick, wet flakes that cling to everything they touch. The porch light created a halo around the figure waiting there, and for a moment I wondered if I'd finally lost my mind completely, if loneliness had driven me to hallucinations. But then the knock came again, gentler this time, almost hesitant. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I need you to know that I'm not the kind of woman who gives up easily. I wasn't raised that way. My mother, God rest her soul, used to say that Wright women were made of Minnesota iron and Lake Superior ice, strong enough to weather any storm, cold enough to freeze out the pain when we needed to. For 75 years, I'd lived by that philosophy. But standing there in my living room, staring at that shadow on my porch, I felt every one of those years weighing on me like stones. The fire I'd built earlier crackled in the hearth behind me. The Christmas tree lights blinked their steady rhythm in the corner, white lights only, the way my late husband James always preferred. The small, wrapped box I'd placed under the tree that morning sat exactly where I'd put it, same as I'd done every Christmas for the past 13 years. A gift for a son who never came home. A tradition born of stubborn hope and a mother's refusal to accept that her only child was truly gone. Before I go any further, I want to ask something of you. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever known what it's like to love someone who's walked away, please take a second to hit that like button. It sounds small, I know, but it helps this story reach other people who might need to hear it. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because every story shared here is real, every heartbreak genuine, every triumph hard-won. Comment below and let me know what city or country you're watching from. It helps me know I'm not alone in this, that somewhere out there, someone understands. Your support means the channel can keep sharing these stories, can keep reminding people that it's never too late for healing. Thank you. Now let me tell you how I got to that moment, standing frozen in my living room while my son waited on the other side of my door. My name is Eleanor Margaret Wright, though most folks in Duluth just call me Ellie. I was born in this city in 1950, delivered during one of the worst blizzards the region had seen in decades. My mother used to joke that I came into the world fighting against the cold, and I suppose in a way, I've been doing that ever since. Duluth isn't an easy place to live. The winters are brutal, the lake-effect snow can bury you for days, and the wind off Lake Superior cuts through you like a knife. But it's home. It's always been home. I grew up in a small house on East 4th Street, the middle child of 3 girls. My father worked at the steel plant down by the harbor, coming home every night with his hands stained black and his back bent from 12-hour shifts. My mother took in sewing and mending, her fingers constantly moving over fabric, creating beauty out of scraps. We didn't have much, but we had enough. That's what mattered in those days, having enough to get by, enough to keep the heat on and food on the table, enough love to fill in the gaps where money couldn't reach. I met James Wright in 1968 at a 4th of July picnic down at Canal Park. I was 18, fresh out of high school and working as a waitress at the coffee shop on Superior Street. He was 21, just back from a brief stint in the Army, looking for work and a fresh start. He had kind eyes, the color of the lake on a calm day, gray-blue and steady. When he smiled at me across the picnic table where someone had set out potato salad and watermelon, I felt something shift in my chest, something that felt like coming home, even though I'd never left. We were married by November of that same year. No big fancy wedding, just a simple ceremony at the courthouse with my parents and his mother as witnesses. James's father had died when he was young, and his mother had raised him alone, working as a cleaning lady at the Duluth hotels that catered to tourists come to see the lake. She was a tough woman, Mrs. Wright, with hands as rough as tree bark and a heart that had been hardened by disappointment. She didn't smile much at our wedding, and I remember wondering if she approved of me, if I was good enough for her only son. But James loved me, and that was enough. We moved into a small apartment on West Superior Street, right above a hardware store that's long since closed down. The place was tiny. 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, a living room where our secondhand sofa took up most of the space. But we painted the walls a cheerful yellow, hung curtains I'd sewn myself, and made it ours. James found work at the shipyards. Hard labor that paid decent money and kept him busy 6 days a week. I kept waitressing, saving every penny I could because we had plans. We wanted a house. We wanted a family. We wanted the kind of life our parents had built, solid and real and lasting. Michael came along in 1977, arriving 3 weeks early on a Tuesday morning in March. I'd been feeling off all week. A persistent backache and strange cramping I'd convinced myself was just normal pregnancy discomfort. James had left for work that morning like always, kissing my forehead and reminding me to take it easy. By noon, I knew something was happening. By 2 o'clock, I was in the back of our neighbor's car, being rushed to St. Luke's Hospital as contractions tore through me like lightning. Michael James Wright came into the world at 4:17 p.m., weighing 6 pounds, 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. The moment they placed him in my arms, still wet and wailing, I understood for the first time what it meant to have your heart living outside your body. I looked down at his scrunched-up face, at the way his tiny fingers gripped my thumb with surprising strength, and I knew that I would die for this child. That I would do anything, endure anything, sacrifice anything to keep him safe. James cried when he held his son for the first time. I'd never seen him cry before, not when his mother died 2 years into our marriage, not when he'd broken his arm in a workplace accident, not even at our wedding. But holding Michael, this tiny, perfect person we'd created together, tears streamed down his face unchecked. He looked at me with such joy, such pure, overwhelming love, and whispered, "We did good, Ellie. We did real good." Those early years were hard in the way that all young families struggle. Too many bills, not enough money, exhaustion that went bone deep. But they were good years, too. Michael was an easy baby, all things considered. He slept through the night by 3 months, rarely fussed unless he was hungry or needed changing. As he grew, he became a quiet, thoughtful child. Not shy exactly, but reserved. He'd sit for hours with his toy trucks, creating elaborate imaginary construction sites on our living room floor, narrating whole conversations between his workers and bosses in different voices. By the time Michael was 5, we'd saved enough to buy our first house. Nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom bungalow on East 8th Street with a small backyard and a detached garage that was falling apart. But it was ours. James spent every free hour fixing the place up, teaching Michael to hand him tools and explaining how things worked. I can still see them out there on summer evenings, my husband patient and kind as he showed our son how to hold a hammer, how to measure twice and cut once, how to take pride in work well done. Michael took to it naturally. By the time he was in middle school, he could fix almost anything. Leaky faucets, stuck windows, electrical outlets that had stopped working. He had his father's steady hands and practical mind. When other kids his age were playing sports or hanging around the mall, Michael was in the garage, building birdhouses or repairing old furniture he'd found at yard sales. He'd clean them up, fix the broken parts, and give them away to neighbors or donate them to the church. He never wanted payment. He just liked making broken things whole again. James and I used to talk about Michael's future late at night, lying in bed with the windows open to let in the lake breeze. James was convinced our son would go far, maybe become an engineer or an architect. I wasn't so sure about college. We didn't have that kind of money saved, and Michael had never shown much interest in academics. He was smart. Don't get me wrong, but book learning bored him. He wanted to work with his hands, to see the tangible results of his labor. There was dignity in that, I thought. Nobility in honest work, in creating and fixing and building. The neighborhood we lived in was solidly working class, people who worked at the docks or the remaining factories. Families who'd been in Duluth for generations and couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Everyone knew everyone, looked out for each other's kids, borrowed sugar and tools, and helped each other move furniture or clear snow from driveways. It was the kind of community that doesn't really exist much anymore, where your neighbors were extended family and you trusted them with your spare key. Michael grew up surrounded by this network of support. Mrs. Anderson next door taught him to make her famous Swedish meatballs. Old Mr. Kowalski across the street showed him how to change a tire and check oil. The Johnsons, 2 houses down, always invited him over to help with their garden, teaching him about soil and seasons and the patience required to make things grow. He was everyone's favorite kid, polite, helpful, humble. The kind of boy who shoveled elderly neighbors' sidewalks without being asked, who helped carry groceries and never expected a dime. When Michael was 16, James started having chest pains. At first, we both dismissed it. Indigestion, stress from work, nothing serious. But the pains got worse, more frequent. By the time we convinced him to see a doctor, the diagnosis was already grim. Advanced heart disease, years of hard labor and stress, catching up with a body that had been pushed too hard for too long. The doctor said there were treatment options, medications that might help, lifestyle changes that could extend his life. But we all knew the truth. James was dying, and there wasn't much anyone could do about it. He held on for 2 more years, getting progressively weaker, unable to work, confined mostly to the house and eventually to bed. Michael, just a junior in high school, became the man of the house practically overnight. He got a job at a construction company after school, working until dark, and then coming home to help me care for his father. I watched my boy transform during those months, saw the carefree teenager disappear, and a serious, determined young man emerge in his place. James died on a Sunday morning in October 2008, with both of us beside him. Michael was 19 by then, and he held his father's hand as life slipped away. He didn't cry at the funeral, didn't shed a single tear as we lowered the casket into the ground at Forest Hill Cemetery. But that night, I heard him sobbing in his room, grief finally overwhelming the strength he'd been forcing himself to maintain. I wanted to go to him, to hold him the way I had when he was small and had nightmares. But I also knew he needed to grieve alone, to process this loss in his own way. After James died, Michael threw himself into work with almost frightening intensity. He dropped out of high school his senior year to work full-time when his father got too sick to provide for us, promising he'd get his GED later. He was good at construction work, had a natural talent for it that his bosses noticed immediately. Within a year, he was supervising crews, managing complex projects, earning decent money for someone his age. He gave me most of his paychecks, insisting on paying the mortgage and bills, saying it was his responsibility now. I was proud of him, of course, but I also worried. He was 20 years old and carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He rarely went out with friends, never dated, seemed to have no interest in the normal pleasures of young adulthood. When I'd try to talk to him about it, encourage him to live a little, he'd just shrug and say there'd be time for that later. First, he needed to make sure I was taken care of, that the house was secure, that everything was stable. That's when Jennifer came into the picture. She was a bookkeeper at the construction company where Michael worked, a pretty girl with auburn hair and a quick smile. She was a couple years older than Michael, divorced already at 24 with no kids. I met her at the company Christmas party in 2009, and she seemed nice enough, friendly, chatty, attentive to Michael in a way I hadn't seen anyone be before. He lit up around her, smiled more, seemed lighter somehow. They started dating seriously by January, and by summer they'd moved in together to an apartment on the West End. I was happy for him, truly. It was good to see Michael building a life, finding someone who made him laugh and helped him carry some of the burden he'd placed on himself. Jennifer would come to Sunday dinners at my house, bringing dessert and helping with dishes, asking me questions about Michael as a child, and seeming genuinely interested in the stories I'd tell. She fit into our small family unit easily, naturally, and I allowed myself to hope that maybe everything would work out fine, that maybe Michael would marry her, have children, give me grandchildren to spoil and love. But relationships, I've learned, are complicated things. By 2011, cracks were starting to show. Michael worked long hours, often coming home exhausted and covered in sawdust or drywall powder. Jennifer wanted more of his time, wanted him to prioritize their relationship over the constant overtime he took on. They started fighting about money, about his commitment to helping me with my expenses, about whether they should start thinking about buying a house, or if he was going to support his mother forever. I heard bits and pieces of this through Michael, who'd stop by on Saturday mornings for coffee and would mention the latest argument almost casually, as if it didn't bother him as much as I suspected it did. I tried to stay out of it, tried not to interfere in their relationship, but I could see where this was heading, could feel the inevitable end approaching like a storm rolling in off the lake. They broke up in March 2012, right around Michael's 35th birthday. Jennifer moved out of their apartment, back in with her parents, and Michael called me that night from a bar somewhere downtown. He wasn't drunk, but I could hear the pain in his voice, the confusion and hurt of someone who'd tried hard and still failed. I invited him to come over, said I'd make him dinner and we could talk. He said maybe tomorrow, he just needed some time alone tonight. That tomorrow never came. Not the way I expected it to. The weeks after Michael's breakup with Jennifer passed in a strange, tense silence. He stopped coming by for Saturday morning coffee, stopped calling as regularly. When I'd phone him, he'd answer, but keep the conversation short, saying he was busy with work, had a lot going on, would call me back later. That later stretched from days to weeks. I told myself he was just processing the end of his relationship, dealing with it in his own way. Men do that, I reasoned. They withdraw, lick their wounds in private, emerge when they're ready. But something felt different this time. Something felt wrong. It was a beautiful spring that year, 2012, the kind of spring that makes Duluth residents forget how brutal the previous winter was. The ice on Lake Superior broke up early, and by late April, the temperatures were mild and pleasant. Tulips bloomed in my front yard. The lilac bush beside the porch filled with purple blooms that perfumed the entire neighborhood. I spent my days tending to the garden, pulling weeds and planting tomatoes and peppers in the small plot James had built for me years ago. I'd retired from the coffee shop by then, living on Social Security and the small life insurance policy James had left. It wasn't much, but combined with the fact that the house was paid off, it was enough. Michael still insisted on helping with utilities and property taxes, depositing money in my account every month, even though I told him it wasn't necessary. That money kept coming even after the breakup, even during his silence. It was reassuring in one way. He was okay, at least financially. But it also felt impersonal, transactional. Money instead of presence. I started making excuses to drive by the construction sites where I knew Michael's company worked, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. A couple of times I did see him, directing workers, examining blueprints, doing the job he was so good at. He looked tired, I thought, older than 35. I never stopped, never called out to him. Some instinct held me back, some sense that he needed whatever space he was claiming for himself. Mother's Day came and went without a call. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. For 35 years, Michael had never missed Mother's Day. Even when he was traveling for work, even when money was tight and he couldn't afford a gift, he always called. Always made sure I knew he was thinking of me. But that May, The phone stayed silent. I sat in my living room that Sunday evening, watching the sun set over the western hills, and felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. Something had changed. Something had broken between us, and I didn't know what or why or how to fix it. In June, I decided to drive to his apartment. I'd called ahead 3 times that week, leaving messages that went unreturned. Enough was enough. I needed to see my son, needed to look him in the eye and understand what was happening. I made a tuna casserole, his favorite since childhood, and drove across town on a Saturday afternoon. His truck was in the parking lot, so I knew he was home. I climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, balancing the casserole dish and my purse, heart pounding harder than the climb warranted. I knocked, waited, knocked again. "Michael, honey, it's Mom. I brought you some dinner." Nothing, but I could hear movement inside, footsteps, the creak of floorboards. I knew he was there, knew he could hear me. "Michael, please, I just want to talk. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." The door opened, but only a crack. Michael's face appeared in the gap, and the expression there, guarded, almost cold, made my stomach drop. This wasn't my son. This was a stranger wearing Michael's face. "Mom, this isn't a good time." "I brought you dinner," I said, holding up the casserole like a peace offering. "Your favorite. I thought maybe we could eat together, catch up. I haven't seen you in weeks, honey." "I'm fine. Really busy with work. I'll call you soon, okay?" "When?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "When will you call, Michael? Because you keep saying that, but you don't. You don't call. You don't visit. What's going on? Are you angry with me about something? Did I do something wrong?" His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "No, Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. I need some space right now. I'm dealing with some stuff, and I need to work through it on my own." "What stuff? Michael, I'm your mother. Let me help. Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." "Not everything can be figured out, Mom. Some things just are. Look, I really do have to go. I'm sorry about the casserole. Just leave it outside, and I'll get it later." He started to close the door, and panic made me reach out, placing my palm flat against it. "Michael, please, don't shut me out. Whatever's wrong, whatever you're going through, you don't have to do it alone. I love you. That hasn't changed and never will." For just a second, his expression softened. His eyes, James's eyes, met mine, and I saw pain there. Deep, raw pain that he was working hard to conceal. But then the walls went back up, and he gently but firmly pushed the door closed. "I'll call you, Mom, I promise. I just need some time." The lock clicked into place. I stood there for a long moment, casserole cooling in my hands, staring at that closed door. Part of me wanted to pound on it, demand he let me in, force him to talk to me. But I'd raised him to be independent, to stand on his own 2 feet. I'd taught him to be strong. I couldn't be angry now that he was being exactly what I'd encouraged him to be. I set the casserole on the doormat and walked back to my car. The whole drive home, I kept wiping away tears, trying to understand what had just happened. What had I missed? What signs had I overlooked? That night, lying in bed, I thought about all the times Michael had been there for me. When James died and I couldn't function, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't imagine facing a world without my husband, Michael had held me together. He'd handled the funeral arrangements, paid the bills, made sure I ate, sat with me in silence when words were too much. He'd been my rock, my strength, my reason to keep going. And now he needed space from me, and I had to respect that, even though it felt like my heart was being torn out. The summer passed in a haze of loneliness and worry. Michael did call, finally, in late July. Brief conversations where he assured me he was fine, work was good, he was eating well and taking care of himself. But there was a distance in his voice that hadn't been there before, a formality that felt like talking to an acquaintance rather than my son. I asked if he wanted to come for dinner, just the 2 of us, like old times. He said maybe soon, but he was really busy with a big project, working 7 days a week. I asked if he needed anything, if I could help in any way. He said no, everything was under control. Control. That word stuck with me. Michael had always needed control, especially after his father died. Control over his work, his finances, his environment. But now it felt like he was trying to control his relationship with me, holding me at arm's length, rationing out just enough contact to keep me from worrying too much, but not enough to actually connect. September brought my birthday, my 64th. The phone rang that morning, and I nearly knocked over my coffee in my rush to answer it. Michael's voice came through, warm and familiar for just a moment. "Happy birthday, Mom." "Thank you, sweetheart. It's so good to hear your voice. I'm sorry I haven't been around much. Things have been complicated." "I understand," I lied. "But you could still come by, even for an hour. I miss you. Michael, I miss my son." Silence on the other end. Then, "I know. I miss you too. But I can't right now. I'm sorry. Can't or won't." More silence. "Does it matter?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It matters to me. I have to go, Mom. There's money in your account for your birthday. Take yourself out somewhere nice, okay?" "I don't want money, Michael. I want you." But he'd already hung up. I spent that birthday alone, sitting in my backyard watching the leaves begin their transformation from green to gold and red. The money appeared in my account the next day, $500, which felt simultaneously generous and insulting. Like he was trying to pay off his guilt, purchase absolution for his absence. Christmas approached like a freight train I couldn't stop. This would be the first Christmas without Michael since he was born. The thought made me physically ill. I kept hoping, kept believing that surely he'd come for Christmas, that no matter how distant he'd been, he wouldn't let the holiday pass without seeing me. Christmas had always been our special time. James used to string lights on the house every year, thousands of them, making our little bungalow visible from blocks away. Michael had helped him, standing on ladders in the cold, laughing and drinking hot chocolate afterward. I put up the tree by myself that year, a small artificial one, because I couldn't face cutting down a real tree alone. I strung the white lights James had always preferred, hung the ornaments Michael had made in elementary school, lopsided snowflakes and salt dough reindeer with googly eyes. I set out the nativity scene, arranged the stockings on the mantel, mine and Michael's, still, even though he hadn't been there to fill his in 3 years, and I waited. Christmas Eve came, cold and clear. I made a small ham, mashed potatoes, green beans, a scaled-down version of the feast I used to prepare when James was alive and Michael was young. I set 2 places at the table, just in case. Put on Christmas music, old Bing Crosby records that crackled and popped. Tried to ignore the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on my chest. The phone didn't ring. The knock never came. At midnight, I dumped the uneaten food in the trash and went to bed, crying into my pillow with a grief that felt deeper than when James had died. Because James's absence was natural, inevitable. Death comes for everyone eventually. But Michael's absence was a choice. My son had chosen to stay away, chosen to cut me out of his life, and I still didn't understand why. The years that followed developed a pattern, a rhythm of loneliness that became my new normal. Each season brought its own particular flavor of pain, its own reminder of absence. Spring meant Michael's birthday passing without celebration. Summer meant the 4th of July, which we'd always spent together watching fireworks over the harbor. Fall meant my birthday, marked now only by the transfer of money into my account. And winter. Winter meant Christmas. The holiday that used to bring such joy became the cruelest time of year. But humans are adaptable creatures, remarkably good at finding ways to survive even the most profound losses. I developed routines, built a life around the hole where my son used to be. I started volunteering at the local senior center, teaching other elderly folks how to use computers and smartphones. It felt good to be useful, to share knowledge, to connect with people who understood what it meant to feel irrelevant in a world that moved too fast. I joined a book club at the library, a group of women, roughly my age, who met every Wednesday afternoon to discuss whatever novel we'd chosen that month. Most of them were widows too, navigating the loneliness of later life. We became friends, these women and I. Not close friends. I've never been good at deep emotional intimacy with anyone but family. But companionable friends. People to have coffee with, to call when I needed someone to talk to. The house required constant maintenance. Things kept breaking. The furnace one winter, the roof needing repair, the water heater giving up the ghost on a Sunday morning. I'd call repairmen, write checks I could barely afford, and think of Michael. Think of how he would have fixed these things himself. How I wouldn't have needed to pay strangers to do work my son could have done in an afternoon. I started a garden that would have made James proud, expanded beyond the small vegetable plot to include flowers, perennials that came back year after year with minimal effort, hostas and daylilies, black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers. The physical work was good for me, kept my body moving when sitting still invited too much thinking. My neighbors complimented the garden, stopped to admire the blooms, and I'd smile and thank them while privately thinking that none of it mattered if I couldn't share it with Michael. The second Christmas arrived, and I told myself it would be easier, that I'd adapted, grown accustomed to his absence. I was wrong. If anything, it hurt more. The hope I'd carried through that first lonely holiday, that it was an aberration, that surely next year would be different, had curdled into acceptance. This was my life now. This was how things were going to be. But I couldn't stop myself from putting up the tree, couldn't stop hanging Michael's stocking alongside mine, and I couldn't stop buying him a gift. It started small that second year, just a warm pair of work gloves I'd seen at the hardware store, the kind with reinforced palms and insulation for cold weather work. I wrapped them carefully, wrote "For Michael" on the tag, and placed the package under the tree. It sat there alone, a symbol of hope I couldn't quite abandon, gathering dust as the days passed and Christmas came and went without him. I didn't throw the gloves away. Instead, I stored them in the hall closet with the other gifts I'd bought for him over the years. A collection of unopened packages, each one a Christmas he'd missed, each one a prayer that next year would be different. The money kept appearing in my account every month like clockwork. I used it grudgingly, hating that I needed it, but unable to refuse entirely. My Social Security barely covered basic expenses, and the small nest egg James had left was dwindling faster than I'd anticipated. The money from Michael, always exactly $600, deposited on the first of each month, made the difference between scraping by and relative comfort. I thought about refusing it, sending it back, making some grand gesture of independence. But pride is a luxury, and I was too practical to let it dictate my decisions. If Michael wanted to ease his guilt with money, I'd take it and use it to keep my house warm and my refrigerator full. But I never thanked him for it, never acknowledged the deposits in our increasingly rare phone conversations. If he was going to keep me at arm's length, he didn't get the satisfaction of my gratitude. Those phone calls became ritualized, predictable. He'd ring on my birthday, on Mother's Day, occasionally on his own birthday. The conversations followed the same pattern. "How are you? I'm fine. How's work? It's good. Are you taking care of yourself? Yes, Mom. Can I come visit? Not right now. I have to go. 3 minutes. 5 at most." Just enough to confirm we were both still alive, still technically related, still trapped in this strange limbo relationship that satisfied neither of us, but that neither seemed able to change. I tried writing letters, long, emotional letters that poured out everything I was feeling, asking all the questions he refused to answer in our brief calls. Why had he left? What had I done? How could we fix this? I sealed them in envelopes, addressed them to his apartment, affixed stamps, and then I'd sit at my kitchen table staring at them, ultimately sliding them into a drawer rather than the mailbox. What was the point? If he wouldn't talk to me on the phone, wouldn't see me in person, why would written words make any difference? The letters joined the Christmas gifts in the closet, a collection of unsent pleas and unanswered questions. The third Christmas, I caught myself talking to his empty stocking. It was Christmas Eve, and I'd had a glass of wine with dinner, something I rarely did anymore. The house was too quiet, the silence pressing in from all sides. I stood in front of the fireplace, looking at the two stockings hung side by side, and heard myself saying out loud, "I don't understand, Michael. I don't understand what I did wrong." The sound of my own voice in the empty house startled me. I looked around, half expecting to see someone there, witness to my pathetic one-sided conversation. But of course I was alone, always alone. That's when I started noticing the small signs that other people thought I was losing it. Mrs. Anderson next door brought over casseroles more frequently, asking with too casual concern if I was doing okay over here all by yourself. The women from book club started calling more often, checking in, making sure I was keeping up with things. The pastor from the Lutheran church I occasionally attended stopped by to see if I'd like to join a grief support group, as if Michael had died, as if I was mourning someone deceased rather than someone who'd simply chosen to stop loving me enough to stay in my life. But maybe that's exactly what I was doing. Mourning the death of the relationship I'd thought we had, the son I'd thought I'd raised. That Michael, the boy who'd held my hand at his father's funeral, who'd worked himself to exhaustion to support me, who'd never missed a Mother's Day in 35 years, that Michael was gone. Replaced by this stranger who sent money and avoided phone calls and had built a wall between us I couldn't scale or break down. Years 4 and 5 blurred together in memory. More of the same. More holidays alone. More birthdays marked by money rather than presents. More nights lying awake wondering what had gone so wrong that my only child couldn't stand to be in my life. I started having dreams about him. In them, Michael was always young, 5, maybe 6 years old, with gap-toothed smiles and scraped knees. He'd be calling for me, needing me, reaching out his little hand for mine. And I'd try to get to him, but something always held me back. An invisible barrier, a distance I couldn't cross no matter how hard I tried. I'd wake from these dreams with tears on my face and an ache in my chest that lasted for hours. The 6th Christmas, I almost didn't put up a tree. What was the point? But habit won out, or maybe hope. I couldn't quite kill hope, no matter how much evidence accumulated against it. So up went the tree, on went the lights, out came the stockings, and the nativity scene, and all the trappings of a holiday I no longer felt. I bought him a book that year, a history of Duluth's shipbuilding industry, beautifully illustrated, the kind of thing Michael would have loved when he was younger. He'd always been fascinated by the massive ore carriers that moved through the canal, had talked as a child about maybe working on the ships someday. I wrapped the book, placed it under the tree, and allowed myself a moment of fantasy. Maybe this year. Maybe this would be the year he came home. He didn't. The pattern continued. Year 7, year 8, year 9. Each Christmas a little harder, a little lonelier. Each year adding another gift to the closet collection, another layer of disappointment to the sediment of grief. I was running out of closet space and emotional resilience in roughly equal measure. I aged during those years. It wasn't just the passage of time. I was in my early 70s now, which brought its own physical challenges. But the loneliness aged me too. I could see it in the mirror, new lines around my mouth and eyes, a tiredness that went deeper than sleepless nights. My hair had gone completely gray, then mostly white. My hands developed the slight tremor common in old age. My knees complained when I worked in the garden. My back ached after cleaning the house. But it was the emotional aging that hit hardest, the slow calcification of hope, the gradual acceptance that this was my life now and would be until I died. No reconciliation, no explanation. Just absence, stretching forward into however many years I had left. The women at book club tried to set me up with widowers from the senior center. Nice men, they assured me. Good men looking for companionship. I went on a few coffee dates to make them happy, sat across from kind strangers, and made small talk about grandchildren and health problems and the weather. But I felt nothing, had nothing to give. How could I open my heart to someone new when it was still so full of grief for the relationship I'd lost? Year 10 marked a decade since I'd last really talked to my son. 10 years since that afternoon at his apartment when he'd shut the door in my face. 10 years of monthly deposits and brief phone calls and unvisited Christmas gifts piling up in my closet. I marked the anniversary, if you could call it that, by finally reading one of the letters I'd written but never sent. It was from year 3, written on what would have been James's birthday. I'd been thinking about how much he would have hated this estrangement, how he would have knocked down Michael's door and demanded an explanation, would have refused to let his son pull away. Dear Michael, the letter began, your father would know how to fix this. He always knew how to fix things. I wish he was here now because I'm lost, baby. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to reach you, and I don't know if I should keep trying or let you go. Tell me what to do. Please, just tell me what you need from me. I folded the letter back up and put it away. No point in reading the rest. Nothing had changed in 7 years. I was no less lost now than I'd been then. The 11th Christmas approached, and I almost didn't put up a tree at all. What was the point? Who was I decorating for? The neighbors who'd see lights in my window and think, poor old Ellie, all alone again. But December 1st arrived, and muscle memory took over. I pulled the boxes down from the attic, assembled the artificial tree, strung the lights. Set out the stockings, worn now, faded, but still hanging side by side on the mantel. And I bought another gift. A fleece-lined flannel shirt this time, the kind Michael had always worn when working outside in winter. I wrapped it, labeled it, added it to the tree. 11 gifts now, representing 11 years of absence. Sometimes I'd go into the closet where all the old gifts were stored and just sit there among them. Surrounded by these physical manifestations of stubborn hope, I'd let myself cry. Really cry, the way I never allowed myself to in front of others. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of absolute despair. If someone had told me, back when Michael was born, that one day I'd be 73 years old and haven't seen my son in over a decade, I wouldn't have believed it. Would have insisted that could never happen to us, that our bond was too strong, our love too deep. How wrong I would have been. I started having health problems around year 12, nothing catastrophic, but the slow accumulation of age-related issues that reminded me mortality wasn't some distant concept anymore. High blood pressure that required daily medication, arthritis in my hands that made gardening painful. A bout with pneumonia that landed me in the hospital for 4 days. The hospital staff asked if there was anyone they should call, any family who should be notified. I gave them Michael's number, even though I knew he probably wouldn't come. They left messages. He called the hospital to check on me but didn't visit. When I was discharged, I took a cab home to my empty house and tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I was used to being alone by now. But it did matter. It mattered so much. The 13th Christmas was approaching now, 2025. 13 years since Michael had closed his door, closed his life to me. I was 75 years old, facing another holiday alone, adding another gift to a collection that had become less about hope and more about ritual. A way of marking time, of proving to myself that I hadn't given up entirely, even though some days it felt like I had. Assessed narrative structure and expanded developmental section depth. I need to continue developing the story. I'm currently in section 3 and need to make sure I'm hitting the word count. Let me check. Section 1, opening and introduction. Target, 700,100 words. Section 2, background and context. Target, 2,002, 500 words. Section 3, development, established life. Target, 3,500, 4. 0 words, I need to continue developing. Section 3, more fully. I should include the list of subtle conflict signs before the estrangement, and really develop each one as a complete scene. Let me continue with more detail about those years of estrangement and the warning signs that preceded it. I need to pause here for a moment because I realize I've been telling you about the years after Michael left, but I haven't told you about what came before, the signs I missed, the warnings I didn't recognize. Looking back now, with the clarity that only distance and pain can bring, I can see there were moments, small, easily dismissed moments, that pointed to what was coming. If I'd been paying closer attention, if I'd asked different questions, maybe things would have turned out differently, or maybe not. Maybe some things are just inevitable, written in a script we can't see until it's already played out. The first sign came about 6 months before the final break, in September 2011. Michael had stopped by for our usual Saturday coffee, and I'd noticed he looked tired, more than usual. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd lost weight. Not a lot, but enough that his shirts hung a little looser on his frame. You feeling okay, honey? I'd asked, pouring him a second cup of coffee and setting out the cinnamon rolls I'd made that morning. You look a little run down. He'd shrugged, not quite meeting my eyes. Just working a lot. Big project downtown. We're converting that old warehouse on Superior Street into condos. Complicated work, lots of late nights. You taking care of yourself? Eating properly? Yeah, Mom, I'm fine. He'd picked at the cinnamon roll but hadn't actually eaten much. Actually, I was thinking. Maybe we should skip next Saturday. I've got to work through the weekend to stay on schedule. My stomach had tightened at that, but I'd forced a smile. Sure, honey. We can skip a week. Just don't work yourself too hard, okay? Your father did that, and look what happened. The moment I said it, I'd regretted it. Bringing up James's death as a cautionary tale about overwork felt manipulative, guilting. Michael's jaw had tightened, and he'd stood up abruptly. I have to go. Thanks for the coffee. He'd left the cinnamon roll half-eaten, kissed my cheek perfunctorily, and walked out. As I'd watched him drive away from my kitchen window, I'd felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. But I'd pushed it down, rationalized it. He was stressed about work. Everyone has bad days. It didn't mean anything. The second sign came in October, just before Halloween. I'd called him to invite him to help me hand out candy, something we'd done together every year since he was small. We'd always made an event of it. I'd make chili or soup. We'd sit on the porch in our jackets, commenting on the kids' costumes and handing out full-size candy bars because I'd never been one to skimp. I can't this year, Mom, he'd said when I called. I've got plans. Plans? What kind of plans? I'd tried to keep my voice light, casual, but I'd felt that anxiety creeping back. Just plans, with some people from work. You could bring them by. There's always plenty of food and... No, Mom, we're doing something else. I'll talk to you later, okay? The abruptness in his tone had stung. Michael had never been rude to me, never short or dismissive. This wasn't like him. After we'd hung up, I'd sat at my kitchen table for a long time, turning the phone over in my hands, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. He was 34 years old. Of course he had his own life, his own plans. I couldn't expect him to spend every holiday with his widowed mother. But Halloween had always been our thing, and he'd never brought work friends around, never mentioned having a social life outside of his relationship with Jennifer. Something felt off, but I didn't know what. The third sign happened in early November during one of our Saturday morning coffees, one of the last ones we'd have. I'd been showing him pictures from the book club's recent trip to the Glensheen mansion, talking about the architecture and the history, and I'd noticed he wasn't really listening. His eyes had a distant quality, and he kept glancing at his phone like he was waiting for something. Michael, did you hear what I said? He'd looked up, startled. What? Sorry, Mom. What were you saying? Never mind. Is everything okay? You seem distracted. I'm fine. Just got a lot on my mind. Want to talk about it? His expression had shuddered immediately. "No, it's nothing important, just work stuff." But the way he'd said it, the way he'd physically pulled back in his chair, had told me it wasn't work stuff at all. It was something personal, something he didn't want to share with me. That had hurt more than I'd wanted to admit. We'd always talked about everything. I was his mother, his confidant, the person he came to when things got hard. When had that changed? I'd let it drop, though. Pushed down my hurt feelings and changed the subject to something neutral. The weather, the upcoming holidays, anything to keep him talking. To keep him there a little longer before he left, and the house went quiet again. The fourth sign was more subtle, easier to miss. In late November, I'd driven past the construction site where Michael's company was working on that downtown condo conversion he'd mentioned. I hadn't planned to stop, didn't want to seem like I was checking up on him, but I'd needed to run errands in that area anyway, and curiosity got the better of me. I'd parked across the street and watched for a while, feeling simultaneously like a concerned mother and a stalker. Michael had been there, directing a crew of workers, pointing at blueprints, doing his job efficiently and competently. But what caught my attention was the woman standing next to him. She was young, late 20s, maybe, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a company jacket. She and Michael were clearly working together, discussing something on the blueprints, and there was an ease between them that made something twist in my stomach. The way they stood close together, the way she laughed at something he said, the way he smiled back, not the tired, forced smile he gave me these days, but a real, genuine smile. I'd driven home feeling unsettled, unable to shake the image. Was Michael seeing someone? And if he was, why hadn't he told me? After Jennifer, I'd assumed he'd let me know if he started dating again. But maybe I'd assumed wrong. Maybe our relationship had already shifted into something more distant, more formal, and I'd been too caught up in my own routines to notice. The fifth sign came at Thanksgiving. I'd invited Michael for dinner, spent 2 days preparing all his favorite foods, turkey with sage dressing, mashed potatoes with his grandmother's gravy recipe, green bean casserole, homemade dinner rolls, pumpkin pie from scratch. I'd set the table for 2, put out the good china, even bought a nice bottle of wine. He'd called the day before Thanksgiving. "Mom, I can't make it tomorrow. Something came up." "What came up?" "Michael, it's Thanksgiving. We always spend Thanksgiving together." "I know, and I'm sorry, but I really can't get out of this. I'll make it up to you, okay?" "Make it up to me how? By not coming to Christmas either?" The words had come out bitter, accusatory. I'd heard the hurt in my own voice and hated it. "Mom, don't be like that." "Be like what? A mother who wants to spend time with her son? A mother who's tired of being pushed aside for something that came up?" Silence on the other end. Then, "I have to go. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving." He'd hung up. I'd ended up eating Thanksgiving dinner alone, surrounded by enough food for 6 people, crying into my mashed potatoes and wondering when everything had gone so wrong. The leftovers had lasted for days, each meal a reminder of absence, each bite flavored with rejection. The 6th sign, maybe the clearest warning I refused to see, happened in early December, about 3 weeks before he cut me off completely. I'd gone to the grocery store, the big one out on Miller Hill, and I'd seen Michael. He'd been with that same blonde woman from the construction site, and they'd been shopping together, pushing a cart, picking out produce, and laughing about something. They'd looked domestic, comfortable, like a couple. I ducked behind an end-cap display of canned goods, watching them through the gap between soup cans. Part of me wanted to walk over, introduce myself, find out who this woman was and what she meant to my son. But another part, the part that was already bracing for impact, already sensing that confrontation would only accelerate whatever was coming, kept me hidden. They'd moved through the store together, and I'd followed at a distance like some pathetic detective. Watched them debate between different types of pasta, saw her put her hand on his arm while making a point about cheese selection. Observed the way he looked at her when she wasn't watching, a look I recognized from the way James used to look at me. A look of love. My son was in love with this woman, and he hadn't told me, hadn't brought her to meet me, hadn't even mentioned her existence. That's when I should have known. That's when I should have seen the writing on the wall. But instead, I'd driven home and told myself it was early days. He'd tell me when he was ready. I just needed to be patient, give him space, not push. God, I was such a fool. The seventh sign came about a week later. Michael had called, actually called, which was becoming rare, and his voice had sounded strange, tight, controlled. Mom, I need to tell you something. My heart had started racing. Okay. What is it? I've been thinking about some things, about family, about the past. What about it? Long pause. Do you remember when Dad got sick? Those last couple years? Of course I remember. Why? I was just a kid, really. 17, 18. I had to grow up so fast, drop out of school, work full-time, take care of everything. I know, honey. And I'm so grateful for everything you did. You were amazing. I didn't have a choice, Mom. You needed me. We needed the money. Dad was dying and someone had to step up. You did the right thing. You were such a good son. Was I? Or did I just do what I had to do because there was no other option? The question had confused me. What are you getting at, Michael? I don't know. I've just been thinking about things. About choices. About whether I've ever really made my own choices or if I've just been reacting, doing what was expected. Michael, you're not making sense. What's really going on? Nothing. Forget it. I shouldn't have called. No, don't do that. Don't shut down. Talk to me, please. But he'd already retreated. I have to go. I'll talk to you later. I'd held the phone long after he'd hung up, trying to decode what had just happened. What was he trying to tell me? That he resented me? That he felt trapped by the responsibilities he'd taken on? That helping me care for his dying father had somehow damaged him? The eighth and final sign came just days before Christmas 2011. Michael had shown up unexpectedly at my house on a Sunday afternoon. I'd been so happy to see him, had immediately started making coffee and pulling out cookies, chattering about how I'd been hoping he'd stop by, how I'd missed him. But he'd stood in my living room, not sitting down, not taking off his coat, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking around at the Christmas decorations with an expression I couldn't read. Michael, what's wrong? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, anything. Did you ever think about what would happen to me? After Dad died, I mean. Did you ever think about what I wanted? What I needed? The question had felt like a punch to the stomach. What? Of course I thought about you. Everything I did was for you. No, Mom. Everything you did was for us, for the family, for keeping things together. But did you ever stop to think about what I wanted for myself? Whether I wanted to drop out of school? Whether I wanted to spend my 20s working 60-hour weeks so you could keep the house? I never asked you to do that. You made that choice. Did I? Really? Because it never felt like a choice. It felt like an obligation, like I didn't have any other option. Tears had sprung to my eyes. Michael, I'm so sorry if you felt trapped, but you could have said something, could have told me you needed something different. Could I? You were grieving Dad. You needed me. How was I supposed to walk away when you needed me? So you're saying, what? That you resented helping me? That you wished you'd left me alone to struggle? He'd closed his eyes, and I could see him fighting some internal battle. No, that's not what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. I can't do this anymore. Can't do what? This, us, being your son and your support system and your reason for getting up in the morning. It's too much, Mom. It's too heavy. I'd felt the floor dropping out from under me. You're my son. You'll always be my son. That's not something you can quit. I know. But I can't be. I can't be responsible for your happiness anymore. I need to live my own life. Make my own choices. Figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of someone else. So you're leaving me. I'm not leaving you, I need some space, some distance, time to figure things out. And that's when I should have fought harder, should have demanded to know what some space meant, how long it would last, what I could do to fix whatever was broken. But I'd been so hurt, so shocked, that I just nodded mutely and watched him walk out. That was the last real conversation we'd had. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. Can see how Michael had been trying to tell me for months that something was wrong, that the weight of our relationship had become unbearable for him. But I'd been so focused on maintaining what we'd always had, so determined to keep him close, to keep us connected, that I'd missed what he was actually saying. He'd needed space to become his own person, and I'd needed him to stay the devoted son who'd never left my side. Those two things couldn't coexist, so he'd chosen himself, and I'd been left alone with my hurt and confusion and a closet full of unopened Christmas gifts. The tension that had been building for months reached its breaking point in late December 2011, though I didn't realize it at the time. After that confrontational visit where Michael had said he needed space, I'd spent days in a state of anxious paralysis, unsure whether to give him the distance he'd asked for or to fight for the relationship I was terrified of losing. I'd decided on a middle path, or what I thought was a middle path. I'd wait until Christmas Eve, then call him, not to pressure him, not to guilt him, just to remind him that I loved him and that the door was always open. Surely he wouldn't ignore me on Christmas. Surely our tradition meant something. Christmas Eve arrived, cold and clear. I'd gone through all the motions of decorating, cooking, preparing, even though I was doing it all alone and increasingly suspected I'd be spending the holiday that way. But hope is a stubborn thing, especially in mothers. I couldn't quite extinguish the tiny flame that kept whispering, "He'll come. He has to come. It's Christmas." At 4 o'clock, I'd put the ham in the oven. At 5, I'd started on the mashed potatoes and green beans. By 6, everything was ready. The table was set for 2, and I was staring at the phone, working up the courage to call. I dialed his number at 6:30, hands shaking so badly I'd almost dropped the phone. It had rung 4 times before going to voicemail. The sound of his recorded voice, "You've reached Michael. Leave a message," had made tears spring to my eyes, but I'd forced them back and waited for the beep. "Hi, honey, it's Mom. I know you said you needed space, and I'm trying to respect that. But it's Christmas Eve, and I just wanted to hear your voice. Dinner's ready if you want to come by. Or I could bring a plate over to you, or we could just talk for a few minutes. I miss you, Michael. I love you. Please call me back." I'd hung up and waited. The food had grown cold on the table. The candles I'd lit had burned down to stubs. The Christmas music had cycled through the same playlist 3 times, and the phone had stayed silent. At midnight, I'd finally admitted defeat. I'd put the food away, blown out what was left of the candles, and gone to bed. But sleep hadn't come. I'd lain in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Michael from the past year, trying to pinpoint the exact moment where I'd lost him. I'd called again on Christmas Day, and the day after, and the day after that. By New Year's, I'd left 7 messages, each one more desperate than the last, and Michael had responded to none of them. That's when the real fear had set in. The thought that maybe something had happened to him. Maybe he was hurt, in trouble, unable to call. I'd driven to his apartment, knocked on his door for 10 minutes straight. His truck was in the parking lot, so I knew he was home, knew he was choosing not to answer. I'd left a note taped to his door. "Michael, I just need to know you're okay. Please call me, even just a text. Anything to let me know you're safe. I love you, Mom." 3 days later, I'd received a text message. The first and only text he'd sent in all those months of silence. "I'm fine. Please stop calling. I need space." 16 words that had somehow hurt more than complete silence would have, because they confirmed what I'd been dreading. This wasn't an accident, wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. My son was deliberately cutting me out of his life, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. I'd tried bargaining with myself. Okay, he needs space. I can give him space. A month. I'll give him a month of complete silence, and then I'll try again. Surely by then he'll have cooled off, whatever this is will have passed, and we can start to rebuild. But January had become February, February had become March, and nothing had changed. The monthly deposits had continued to appear in my account, $600 like clockwork, on the first of every month. But no calls, no visits, no explanation. I'd driven by his apartment complex once a week just to see his truck in the parking lot to confirm he was still alive. Sometimes I'd see him leaving for work in the morning or coming home in the evening. He'd look the same walk, same truck, same work clothes. But he also looked different in ways I couldn't quite name. Lighter, maybe, like a weight had been lifted. And that had hurt worst of all, because it meant that weight had been me. By spring, I'd started to feel like I was losing my mind. The isolation was doing things to my thinking, making me question my own memory, my own actions. Had I been too clingy? Too demanding? Had I made Michael responsible for my happiness in ways that were unhealthy? Or was I just being gaslit by my own guilt, blaming myself for his choice to walk away? I'd started seeing a therapist in April 2012, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in family relationships and grief. I'd sit in her office once a week, in a comfortable leather chair that somehow made it easier to cry and try to make sense of what had happened. It sounds like Michael might be experiencing what we call caregiver burnout, Dr. Chen had said during one session. He took on adult responsibilities very young, dropping out of school, supporting the family financially, caring for his dying father. That kind of stress, especially at that age, can create resentment that might not surface for years. But he never said he resented it, I'd protested. He always said he wanted to help, that it was the right thing to do. What someone says and what they feel aren't always the same thing, especially when there's guilt involved. Michael might have felt obligated to say he was fine, to be strong for you, even when he was struggling. So this is my fault. I should have made him go back to school, should have found a way to manage without his help. This isn't about fault, Eleanor. It's about understanding. Michael made his own choices, even if those choices were influenced by circumstances. But he's also allowed to reassess those choices later and decide he needs something different. Even if that means abandoning his mother? Dr. Chen had given me a patient look. He hasn't abandoned you. He's still supporting you financially, still maintaining some minimal contact. What he's done is set a boundary. A very harsh, painful boundary, but a boundary nonetheless. A boundary that feels like a wall. Yes, I imagine it does. The therapy had helped in its way. It had given me a framework for understanding what might be happening with Michael, even if it didn't change the fundamental reality of his absence. But it had also forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself and our relationship. Had I leaned on Michael too much after James died? Absolutely. Had I made him my primary source of emotional support, my reason for getting up in the morning? Yes, I had. Had that been fair to a young man in his 20s who should have been building his own life? Probably not. But did that justify cutting me off completely? Did my mistakes, and I could acknowledge they were mistakes, warrant this level of rejection? Dr. Chen couldn't answer that question. No one could. Only Michael could, and he wasn't talking. By the time summer arrived, I'd settled into a new kind of existence. Not acceptance exactly, but a grim determination to survive. I couldn't change Michael's choices, but I could change my own response to them. I could build a life that wasn't entirely defined by his absence. That's when I'd started volunteering more seriously at the senior center, taken up the book club, expanded my garden into something beautiful. Not because these things made me happy. I'm not sure I was capable of real happiness anymore, but because they gave me purpose, something to do besides sit in my house and wait for a phone call that never came. The phone calls from Michael on my birthday, and Mother's Day continued like clockwork, brief and stilted. I'd tried varying my approach. Sometimes I'd be warm and chatty, other times more reserved. Occasionally, I'd directly ask what I'd done wrong. Nothing changed the pattern. 3 minutes, 5 at most, then he'd find a reason to hang up. "I love you, Michael," I'd say at the end of every call. "I hope you know that. Whatever happened between us, whatever you're angry about, I love you." "I know, Mom. I love you too. I have to go." Did he love me? How could he love me and stay away? How could love coexist with this kind of cruelty? These were the questions that haunted my sleepless nights, that followed me through my days like persistent shadows. One particularly low point came in July, during a heat wave that made Duluth feel like a different planet. The house was stifling, my window air conditioner struggling to make a dent in the oppressive heat. I'd been watering my garden, watching my beautiful flowers wilt despite my best efforts, when I'd heard a child's laughter from the yard next door. Mrs. Anderson's grandson was visiting, a little boy of about 5. He'd been running through their sprinkler, giggling and shrieking with joy, while his grandmother watched from the porch with the kind of contented smile only grandparents can wear. I'd stood there with the hose in my hand, watching this scene of simple domestic happiness, and something inside me had broken. I'd dropped the hose, gone inside, closed all the curtains, and spent the rest of the day in bed, crying into my pillow like a child. That could have been me, should have been me. Michael could have given me grandchildren, and I could have been the one watching them play, spoiling them with cookies and quarters, being the grandmother I'd always imagined I'd be. But instead, I was alone, watering flowers no one would see, and maintaining a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. These moments of despair came and went, sharp and unexpected, triggered by the strangest things. A father and son working together in the hardware store, a commercial showing a family gathering for dinner, Christmas music starting in October, each one a reminder of what I'd lost, what I might never get back. But humans are resilient, stubborn. We keep going even when there's no good reason to. Keep putting one foot in front of the other because the alternative, giving up entirely, feels worse. So I kept going, kept getting up each morning, kept tending my garden and attending book club and volunteering at the senior center. Kept breathing, kept living, even when living felt like endurance rather than anything resembling joy. Now, standing in my living room in December 2025, with snow falling outside and that knock still echoing in my ears, all of those years collapsed into a single moment. 13 years of loneliness and confusion and grief and stubborn hope, all leading to this, a silhouette on my porch, a man who was both my son and a stranger, waiting for me to open the door. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they'd been filled with concrete. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, feel it in my throat. This was what I'd prayed for, what I'd fantasized about, what I'd spent 13 Christmases hoping would happen. And now that it was real, I was paralyzed with fear. What if he was just here to tell me he was moving away? What if this was a final goodbye? What if he'd come to say all the terrible things he'd been holding back, to explain exactly why I'd been such a terrible mother that he'd needed to disappear from my life? Or worse, what if I opened the door and realized I didn't even know him anymore? That the man standing on my porch bore no resemblance to the son I'd raised, and that 13 years had created a gap too wide to bridge. Orchestrated pivotal reunion scene between estranged mother and son. I'm in section 4 now, tension escalation, and need to continue building toward the climactic moment of discovery reunion. Let me continue with the moment she opens the door and sees Michael for the first time in 13 years. The knock came again. Softer this time, almost tentative. And somehow, that gentleness, that uncertainty in the sound, broke through my paralysis, because it told me that whoever was on the other side of that door was nervous too, was scared too, and that made him human, made him real. I forced my feet to move, crossing the living room in what felt like slow motion. Each step seemed to take an eternity, my hand reaching out toward the doorknob like I was moving through water. I could see his outline more clearly now through the frosted glass, tall, broad-shouldered, shoulders hunched against the cold. Snowflakes clung to his jacket, glittering in the porch light. My hand closed around the doorknob. The metal felt cold against my palm, solid and real. This was happening. This was really happening. I took a breath that hurt going in, and I opened the door. Michael stood there, and the sight of him drove all the air from my lungs. He looked older. Of course he did. He was 48 now, not the 35-year-old who'd closed his door in my face 13 years ago. His dark hair had gray threaded through it at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He'd grown a beard, neatly trimmed, mostly dark, but with patches of white. He was still big, that hadn't changed, but he carried his size differently now. Less like burden, more like comfort. But it was his eyes that undid me. Those eyes, James's eyes, gray-blue like the lake in winter, looked at me with an expression that contained so many things I couldn't name them all. Regret, fear, hope, longing, and love. God help me, I could see love there, even after everything. He was holding something, a small wrapped package, Christmas paper with snowmen on it. His hands, roughened by years of construction work, trembled slightly as he gripped it. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there, separated by the threshold, looking at each other like survivors of some terrible shipwreck who'd each thought the other was dead. It was snowing harder now. Big, wet flakes that caught in his beard melted on his shoulders. The cold air rushed into my warm house, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, my throat closing up with emotions I couldn't voice. "Hi, Mom," he said finally. His voice was deeper than I remembered, roughened by time and use, but unmistakably his. Can I come in?" I stepped back from the door, moving automatically, and Michael crossed the threshold into my home for the first time in 13 years. He stood in the entryway, snow melting off his boots onto the mat, looking around at the living room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Taking it all in. The Christmas tree with its white lights, the stockings on the mantel, the furniture that was the same but older, worn by time. His eyes landed on the tree, and I saw them widen slightly. Because there underneath wasn't just the single gift I'd placed there that morning. The closet where I'd stored all 13 years' worth of Christmas presents had been in the front hall, and the door was slightly ajar. He could see inside, see the stack of wrapped packages, 13 years of stubborn hope made physical. "You kept them all," he said softly. It wasn't a question. I didn't know what else to do with them. My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. I couldn't throw them away. That would have felt like giving up. Michael closed his eyes, and I saw his jaw work like he was trying to swallow something that hurt. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I'm sorry," he said. "God, Mom, I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air between us, too big and too small all at once. Sorry. Such an inadequate word for 13 years of absence, 13 Christmases alone, 13 birthday calls that lasted 3 minutes. But it was also everything. An acknowledgement, an admission, a bridge, however fragile, thrown across the chasm that had separated us. I wanted to say so many things, wanted to scream at him, shake him, demand to know why he'd stayed away so long, wanted to throw my arms around him and never let go, wanted to cry and rage and forgive and reject all at the same time. What came out was, "Take off your boots. You're getting snow all over the floor." It was such a mundane thing to say, such an absurdly normal response to this moment that had been 13 years in the making. But maybe that's what we both needed. Something ordinary to anchor us, something simple to focus on while we figured out how to navigate this impossible situation. Michael bent down and unlaced his work boots, setting them neatly on the mat. He was wearing thick wool socks with a hole starting in one heel. The sight of that small imperfection, the evidence that he'd been living a whole life I knew nothing about, wearing socks down to holes, dealing with everyday problems without me, made my throat tighten again. He straightened up, still holding the wrapped package. "I brought you something. For Christmas." I looked at the gift, then back at his face. "You came to give me a present." "No, I mean, yes, but—" He stopped, took a breath, started again. "I came to see you, to talk, to try to, I don't know, explain maybe, or apologize, or just be here. The present is it's just a present." 13 years, I heard myself say. 13 years, Michael. And you show up on Christmas Eve with a present like it's been a few weeks. He flinched at the pain in my voice. I know it's not enough. Nothing I could say or do would be enough to make up for that time. But I had to start somewhere. And I thought. I hoped. Christmas seemed right. I wanted to be angry, wanted to hold on to the hurt and betrayal and make him feel even a fraction of the pain I'd endured. But standing there looking at my son, who I'd thought was lost to me forever, I found I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe later when the shock wore off, but right now all I felt was a desperate, overwhelming need to understand. Why? The question came out broken. Why did you leave? What did I do? You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. It was never about you doing something wrong. Then what was it about? Because I've spent 13 years trying to figure that out, and I've never been able to make it make sense. Michael set the present down on the small table by the door and ran his hand over his beard, a nervous gesture I didn't recognize. "Can we sit down? It's a long story." I led him into the living room, moving mechanically, my mind still trying to process that this was real, that my son was actually here, in my house, about to tell me the truth I'd been desperate to hear for over a decade. We sat in the same places we'd always sat when he'd visit, me in James's old recliner, him on the couch. The muscle memory of it was almost painful. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. For a long moment, he just sat there, gathering his thoughts or his courage or both. I forced myself to stay quiet, to wait, even though every cell in my body was screaming for answers. Finally, he started talking. "Do you remember when Dad died?" he began. "Not the day itself, but the whole last couple years. How I dropped out of school, started working full-time, basically became the man of the house overnight. Of course I remember. I was 19 years old, and I was terrified, every single day, scared Dad was going to die and leave you alone, scared I wasn't strong enough to take care of you, scared I was going to fail at being what you both needed me to be." He paused, swallowed hard. But I didn't let myself feel any of that. I just pushed it down and kept going because that's what you do, right? That's what being a man means, being strong, not showing weakness. I wanted to interrupt, to tell him he didn't have to be strong all the time, but I bit my tongue. This was his story. He needed to tell it his way. "After Dad died, it got worse. You were grieving, and I felt like I had to be strong enough for both of us. So I worked more hours, took on more responsibility, gave you most of my money. And I told myself it was temporary, that once you were stable, once you were okay again, I could start thinking about what I wanted. Go back to school, maybe. Have a life." He looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was raw. "But you never stopped needing me, or I never stopped believing you needed me. It became this cycle where I'd work myself to exhaustion, give you everything I had, and feel good about being a good son. And then I'd feel resentful, and then I'd feel guilty about feeling resentful, and then I'd work harder to make up for the guilt, over and over." "I never asked you to give up your life for me," I said, my voice shaking. "I know, you never asked. That's what made it so hard, because if you'd demanded it, I could have rebelled. I could have said no. But you just needed me. And I couldn't say no to that. Couldn't walk away when you needed me. So you waited until you could say no, and then you disappeared. Not exactly. He leaned back against the couch, staring up at the ceiling. I met someone, Rachel. She worked at the construction company. We started dating about 6 months before I stopped coming around. Rachel, not Jennifer. A whole relationship I'd known nothing about. The blonde woman from the grocery store, probably. Rachel was the first person who ever made me feel like I could be something other than your son, other than my father's legacy. She saw me as Michael, just Michael, and being with her, I started to remember who that was, or to figure it out for the first time, maybe. And being with her meant you couldn't be with me. No, yes, sort of. He grimaced. Rachel could see that I was drowning, could see how much guilt and obligation I was carrying. She started asking questions about our relationship, yours and mine, and I didn't like the answers I was giving. Started realizing that maybe what I thought was love and duty was actually unhealthy, codependent. The word hit me like a slap, codependent, as if our relationship, the bond between mother and son, was some kind of disease. So you just left, without explanation, without trying to fix it. I tried, Mom. I tried to talk to you about it. That day I came over and asked if you'd ever thought about what I wanted. Do you remember that? I did remember. The 8th warning sign. You said you couldn't be responsible for my happiness anymore. And you looked at me like I'd stabbed you, like the idea that I wanted my own life was a betrayal. And maybe it was. But I couldn't keep drowning to keep you afloat. We sat in silence for a moment. The Christmas tree lights blinked their steady rhythm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in white, making the world feel hushed and separate from reality. Why didn't you just tell me all this? I asked finally. Why cut me off completely? We could have worked something out. I could have. I don't know, gotten more help, relied on you less. Because I didn't know how to set boundaries without building walls. I'd never learned that. With Dad, it was all or nothing. Either I was taking care of him completely, or he was dead. There was no middle ground. And I applied that same thinking to us. Either I was your devoted son who dropped everything for you, or I had to step back completely. I didn't know there was anything in between. And in 13 years, you never figured it out? His expression crumpled. I wanted to call you so many times, especially at first. I'd pick up the phone, start dialing, and then panic, because I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain what I'd done in a way that wouldn't hurt you more. So I'd hang up, send you money instead, tell myself that as long as I was taking care of you financially, I wasn't completely abandoning you. But you were abandoning me. Money isn't presence. Money isn't love. I know that now. I didn't know it then, or I knew it, but I couldn't face it. What changed? I asked. Why are you here now, after all this time? Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, creased and worn like it had been folded and unfolded many times. He handed it to me. It was a picture of a little girl, maybe 3 years old, with dark curly hair and a gap-toothed smile. She was wearing a pink dress and holding a stuffed rabbit, laughing at whoever was taking the photo. That's Emma, Michael said softly. My daughter. The world tilted sideways. I stared at the photograph in my hands. This little girl who looked nothing like Michael and everything like him at the same time. The set of her jaw, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. My granddaughter. I had a granddaughter. You have a daughter. The words came out flat, emotionless. Because I'd gone beyond feeling into some numb space where information just existed without attaching to anything. Yes, Emma. She's 3. Her birthday was last month. 3 years old, and you never told me. I know. You got married, had a baby, raised her for 3 years, and you never thought to mention it. Rachel and I aren't married. We're engaged. The wedding's next summer. He said it quickly, like it mattered, like any of the details mattered, when the fundamental fact was that he'd built an entire life, an entire family, without me in it. I looked at the photograph again. Emma, my granddaughter Emma, who I'd never met, never held, never known existed. Another wave of grief washed over me, different from the grief of losing Michael, but somehow worse. Because this wasn't just about what I'd lost. It was about what had been taken from me. Birthdays and first words and bedtime stories and all the precious moments that grandmothers treasure. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. Michael's voice was thick with emotion when he answered. "Because Emma's getting old enough to ask questions. About me, about my family, about where I came from. And Rachel asked me what I was going to tell her. Whether I was going to say my mother was dead or tell her the truth, that I have a mother I haven't seen in over a decade. And you couldn't bring yourself to lie to her. I couldn't bring myself to teach her that it's okay to cut people out of your life when things get hard. I couldn't model that for her. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. I look at her, Mom, and I see how much she loves me. Unconditionally. Completely. The way a child loves their parent. And I think about you, about how you loved me that same way, and how I repaid that by disappearing. So you're here out of guilt. No, I'm here because I finally understand what I've done. Because I've spent 3 years watching my daughter grow and realizing that one day she's going to be an adult with her own life and her own choices. And I'm terrified that she'll do to me what I did to you. That she'll decide I'm too much, or I need too much, or our relationship is too complicated, and she'll just leave. And I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I did wrong. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face into his beard. I don't want Emma to learn from my example. I want her to see that relationships are hard, that they require work and communication and forgiveness. I want her to know her grandmother. And God, Mom, I want my mother back. I want to stop punishing both of us for mistakes we both made. I wanted to go to him, wanted to hold him the way I had when he was small and the world felt too big and scary. But I couldn't move. Couldn't process this fast enough to know what I was feeling beyond shock and anger and a desperate, aching hope that this could somehow be fixed. "You said we both made mistakes," I heard myself say. "What mistakes did I make?" Michael wiped his face, took a shaky breath. "You made me your whole world. After Dad died, I became your reason for everything. Your identity was tied up in being my mother, in taking care of me, in our relationship. And that was too much weight for one person to carry. It would have been unhealthy if I was still a child. But I was an adult, and I needed space to figure out who I was separate from you. And you couldn't let me have that." The words stung because they were true. I had made Michael my whole world. After James died, my son had been the only thing that gave my life meaning. And I'd clung to that, to him, because without it, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. "I didn't know how to be anything else," I said quietly. "Your father was gone. My friends were busy with their own families. You were all I had." "I know, and I'm not blaming you for that. I'm just trying to explain why I felt like I was suffocating, why I had to step back so completely." He leaned forward again, meeting my eyes. "But I went too far, way too far. I should have set boundaries without disappearing. Should have insisted on therapy or regular check-ins or some kind of middle ground. Should have trusted that you were strong enough to handle me having my own life. Were you right? About me? About us being codependent? I don't know. Probably, in some ways. But relationships are complicated, Mom. We all depend on each other in different ways. The question is whether it's healthy dependence or unhealthy. And I think we crossed that line somewhere, both of us, without realizing it. We sat in silence again. I kept looking at Emma's photograph, this little girl who shared my genes, but who I'd never know unless Michael and I could find a way to bridge this impossible distance. "I'm 75 years old," I said finally. "I don't have time for gradual healing. I don't have the luxury of years of therapy to work through this." "I know. So what do you want from me? Forgiveness? Absolution? A fresh start like the past 13 years never happened?" "I want." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want a chance. Not to erase what happened, because we can't. But to build something new. To let you meet Emma. To introduce you to Rachel. To have Sunday dinners again, maybe. To call you and tell you about my day. To be your son again, in a way that's healthy for both of us. And if I can't do that, if I'm too angry, too hurt, then I'll accept that. I'll understand that I've broken something that can't be fixed. But I had to try, Mom. I had to at least try." I looked around my living room, at the Christmas tree with its lonely presents underneath, at the stockings hung with care, at the life I'd built around absence. And I thought about the choice in front of me. I could cling to my hurt, nurse my grievances, make Michael pay for the pain he'd caused. It would be justified. It would be understandable. But it would also mean spending whatever years I had left without my son, without my granddaughter, without the family I'd spent 13 Christmases praying would come home. "I can't promise I won't be angry sometimes," I said. "I can't promise this will be easy. I don't need easy. I just need a chance. And you can't disappear again. If you're back in my life, you're back. Not halfway, not with one foot out the door. If we're doing this, we're really doing it. I promise. No more running, no more silence." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not just the man he'd become, but the boy he'd been. Saw him at 5, helping James in the garage. At 10, proudly showing me a birdhouse he'd built. At 19, trying to be strong while his father died. At 35, drowning under the weight of obligations he'd never asked for but had shouldered anyway. And I saw Emma in that photograph. Saw a little girl who deserved to know where she came from, who her grandmother was, what her father's childhood was like. "Okay," I said. The word felt both too big and too small. "We can try." The relief that washed over Michael's face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Mom. I have conditions. Anything. I want to meet Emma soon. Not months from now, not when you get around to it. Soon. Tomorrow, if you want. We could do Christmas dinner here, the 4 of us." The thought of it, of cooking Christmas dinner for my son and his family, of filling this house with voices and laughter instead of silence, made something crack in my chest. "And I want to understand. I want you to tell me everything. About Rachel, about the pregnancy, about Emma's birth and first words and all the moments I missed. It's going to hurt to hear it, but I need to know. I need to understand the life you've been living without me. I'll tell you everything, whatever you want to know. And I want honesty. If I'm being too clingy, if I'm overstepping, if something I do reminds you of why you left, I want you to tell me. No more silence, no more building walls. We talk it out even when it's hard. Deal, but that goes both ways. If I'm not calling enough, or I'm being distant, or you need more from me, you have to tell me too. We both have to be honest." I nodded, feeling the first fragile threads of hope starting to weave themselves into something that might someday be strong enough to support us both. "There's something else," Michael said. He got up and retrieved the wrapped package from the table by the door, handed it to me. "I've been buying these for 13 years, one every Christmas. Kept them in my closet because I couldn't throw them away, but I didn't know if I'd ever have the chance to give them to you." My hands shook as I took the gift. It was heavier than I expected. Solid. I tore the paper carefully, revealing a wooden box, handmade, beautifully crafted. The lid was inlaid with a design of a winter scene, snow-covered trees, a small house with lights in the windows. "Did you make this?" "Yeah," I've been doing woodworking in my spare time, taught myself from YouTube videos and books. I made one of these every Christmas, thinking that maybe someday I'd have the courage to give them to you. This is the 13th. I opened the box. Inside was a collection of photographs: Michael and Rachel, Emma as a newborn, Emma taking her first steps, Emma's 3rd birthday party. All the moments I'd missed, preserved and offered to me like a peace offering. I thought you might want to see what you've missed, and I thought, maybe we could fill future boxes with new memories. Together. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I just held that box, looking at these images of the family I'd been shut out from, feeling grief and joy and anger and love all tangled up together in a knot I might spend the rest of my life trying to untangle. Mom, are you okay? I looked up at him through tears I could no longer hold back. No, I'm not okay. I don't know if I'll be okay for a long time, but I'm glad you're here. I'm so glad you came home. Michael crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of my chair, laying his head in my lap the way he had as a child, and I put my hands on his head. His hair was thinner than I remembered, streaked with gray, and cried for everything we'd lost and everything we might still save. We stayed like that for a long time, while the snow fell outside and the Christmas tree lights blinked, and the house that had been silent for 13 years filled with the sound of 2 people trying to find their way back to each other. We talked through the night, Michael and I. Once we started, it felt like we couldn't stop. 13 years of silence breaking open like a dam, releasing a flood of words and emotions and explanations that had been dammed up for too long. He told me about Rachel, how they'd met at a construction company Christmas party in 2011, both of them standing awkwardly by the punch bowl, making small talk about how terrible the music was. She'd made him laugh, he said, really laugh, for the first time in years. She was 10 years younger than him, a bookkeeper who'd grown up in Virginia, Minnesota, moved to Duluth for college and never left. They'd started dating casually at first. Coffee dates, walks along the lakefront, dinners at the little Thai restaurant downtown. Michael had told her about Jennifer, about the breakup, about his complicated relationship with his mother. And Rachel had listened without judgment, asked gentle questions, helped him start to see patterns he'd been too close to recognize. She was the one who suggested I see a therapist, Michael said. We'd moved to the kitchen by then, sitting at the table where we'd shared so many Saturday morning coffees. I'd made tea, and we both wrapped our hands around our mugs like the warmth could somehow anchor us. She said it wasn't normal to feel guilty every time you did something for yourself, that the amount of anxiety I felt about disappointing you wasn't healthy. And the therapist agreed. Yeah, he did. We worked together for about 6 months before I stopped coming to see you. He helped me understand that I'd taken on a caregiver role way too young, and that it had messed up my understanding of boundaries and self-care and healthy relationships. Did he tell you to cut me off? No. He told me I needed to have an honest conversation with you about my needs and our relationship, that I needed to set clear boundaries and enforce them consistently. Michael looked down at his tea. But I didn't know how to do that. I tried that day I came over and told you I needed space, but when I saw how much it hurt you, I panicked. Thought maybe it would be easier to just step away completely, let you move on without me. Let me move on? Michael, you're my son. You don't move on from your child. I know that now, but at the time I thought, I don't know. I thought maybe if I was out of your life, you'd be forced to build other relationships, find other sources of support. That eventually you'd be okay without me. And were you okay without me? The question hung in the air. Michael's hands tightened around his mug. No, he said quietly. I thought I would be. Thought that without the guilt and the obligation, I'd finally be free to just live. Be happy. But it turns out you can't excise someone from your life without leaving a wound, and that wound never healed. It just got infected with more guilt, more shame. He told me about the first year without contact, how he'd thrown himself into work, into his relationship with Rachel, into building a new life that didn't include me. They'd moved in together, bought a little house on the West End. He'd proposed on her birthday, a simple proposal over homemade dinner, no fancy restaurant or public spectacle. But even as he was moving forward, building this new life, he said he'd felt my absence like a phantom limb, would see something funny and instinctively think, I should tell Mom about this, would pass my street and have to fight the urge to turn down it, stop by for coffee, would lie awake at night wondering if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I'd gotten the money he'd deposited. Why didn't you just call? I asked. If you were thinking about me, missing me, why didn't you just pick up the phone? Pride, shame, fear, pick one. He rubbed his beard, that new nervous gesture. Every day that passed made it harder. How do you call your mother after 6 months of silence? A year? 2 years? What do you even say? Sorry I abandoned you, but I'm doing great. How are you? It felt impossible. Rachel had gotten pregnant in early 2022. They hadn't been trying, but they hadn't been preventing either. And when the test came back positive, Michael said his first thought was, I need to tell my mom. But I couldn't, he continued. Couldn't call you up after 3 years and announce I was going to be a father. Couldn't give you that news like nothing had happened between us. So I kept it to myself. Told Rachel's family, our friends, everyone except the one person I most wanted to tell. Emma had been born on November 15th, 2022, after a long labor that had terrified Michael. He'd stood in that delivery room holding Rachel's hand, watching his daughter come into the world, and had felt something break inside him. I looked at her, this tiny, perfect person, and all I could think was that you'd given birth to me the same way, that you'd held me and loved me from the first moment, the way I was already loving Emma, and that I'd repaid that love by cutting you out of my life. Did you think about calling then? Every day. But by then it had been almost 4 years. Emma was growing so fast, rolling over, sitting up, crawling. I'd miss a day of thinking I should call, and then she'd hit a new milestone, and it would be another day gone, another memory you'd missed. And I'd think, she'd be so angry if she knew about all of this. It's too late now. Too much has happened. But Emma had kept growing, started walking, started talking, started asking questions about the world and her place in it. And Michael and Rachel had started talking about the wedding they'd postponed when Emma was born, about the future they were building together. Rachel's parents came to visit for Thanksgiving this year, Michael said. Emma was showing them pictures, talking about her cousins and aunts and uncles, and Rachel's mom asked her, "What about Daddy's family? Does Daddy have a mommy and daddy?" I could imagine the scene, this innocent question from a well-meaning grandmother, unaware she was poking at a wound that had never healed. Emma looked at me with these big eyes and said, "Do you have a mommy, Daddy?" And I couldn't lie to her. I said yes, I did. And she asked why she'd never met you. Asked if you lived far away, or if you were sick, or if I'd lost you like Nemo lost his mommy in the movie. Michael's voice broke. I didn't know what to say. Rachel took Emma into the other room, and her mom just looked at me with this expression that made me feel about 2 inches tall. She asked what had happened between us, and I tried to explain. Made it sound like a mutual decision, a gradual drifting apart. But she wasn't buying it. Rachel's mother, it turned out, had lost her own mother to cancer 5 years earlier. She'd told Michael that she would give anything to have one more day, one more conversation, one more chance to say the things she'd left unsaid. And here he was, with a living, breathing mother who he'd voluntarily shut out of his life. She said, "That little girl in there deserves to know her grandmother, and your mother deserves to know her granddaughter. Whatever happened between you two, however bad it was, it can't be worth this." And she was right. I knew she was right. That's when Michael had started planning, started rehearsing what he'd say, how he'd explain, how he'd ask for forgiveness he didn't deserve. He'd driven by my house a dozen times in the past 3 weeks, working up the courage to knock. Had parked down the street and just sat there, watching my house, seeing the Christmas lights go up, knowing I was in there alone. What finally made you do it? What made you knock tonight? Emma, she asked me this morning what we were doing for Christmas. I told her we were going to Grandma and Grandpa's, Rachel's parents. And she said, "What about your mommy? Is she spending Christmas all alone?" He wiped his eyes. I couldn't lie to her again. Couldn't tell her it was okay to leave people alone on Christmas when they should be with family. So I told her I was going to see you tonight, that I was going to try to fix something I'd broken a long time ago. What did she say? A small smile crossed his face, the first real smile I'd seen since he'd arrived. She said, "Good job, Daddy. Everyone should be with their mommy on Christmas." I had to look away, overcome. This child I'd never met had unknowingly brought my son back to me. This little girl who existed because Michael had needed space to build his own life had been the catalyst for healing the wound that space had created. We talked about Rachel after that. Michael showed me more pictures on his phone. Rachel pregnant, Rachel holding newborn Emma, Rachel and Michael on a hiking trail with Emma in a backpack carrier. She was pretty in an understated way, with shoulder-length brown hair and a warm smile. She looked kind, solid, like someone who could handle Michael's intensity without being overwhelmed by it. "Does she know you're here?" I asked. "Yeah, she's the one who pushed me to do it, said she was tired of watching me carry around this guilt, that it was time to either fix things or accept that they were broken. She gave me an ultimatum, actually. Said if I didn't at least try to reconnect with you before Christmas, she was going to contact you herself. I think I like her. You'll love her. Mom, she's steady, patient. She doesn't let me get away with my bullshit, but she also doesn't judge me for it. She just helps me be better. That's what good partners do. Like you and Dad." The mention of James brought a fresh wave of emotion. What would he think of all this? Would he be disappointed in Michael for leaving? Disappointed in me for letting him leave? Or would he understand, the way he'd always understood the complicated tangles of human relationships? "Your father would have dragged you back here by your ear," I said. "Would have shown up at your house and refused to leave until you talked to him." I know, I thought about that a lot, wondered what he'd say if he could see me now. He'd say you're human, that you made mistakes, but you're trying to fix them. That's all any of us can do. We talked until the sky started to lighten, the darkness giving way to the gray dawn of Christmas morning. We talked about the years we'd missed, the milestones and moments that couldn't be reclaimed. Emma's first word, Dada, which made Michael tear up all over again. Her first steps, at 11 months, early for a baby. Her favorite foods, macaroni and cheese, strawberries, and oddly enough, pickles. I told him about my life too, about the senior center and the book club and the garden that had kept me sane, about the therapy with Dr. Chen, about the health scare that had landed me in the hospital, about all the times I'd almost called him, but talked myself out of it. I was so angry, I admitted. For years I was just furious. At you for leaving, at myself for whatever I'd done to drive you away, at God for letting it happen, at James for dying and leaving me alone to screw everything up. You didn't screw everything up, Mom. Didn't I? My son disappeared from my life for 13 years. Somewhere along the way, I must have done something catastrophically wrong. No. You loved me. Maybe too much. Maybe in ways that weren't always healthy. But you loved me. And I loved you even when I was gone. That love never went away. It just got complicated. Love is always complicated. Yeah, it is. As the Christmas morning light filled my kitchen, painting everything in soft grays and golds, I felt something I hadn't felt in 13 years. Peace. Not the absence of pain. The hurt was still there, still raw and real. But underneath it was a foundation of hope, fragile but real. We had a long way to go, Michael and I. Years of hurt to work through, trust to rebuild, boundaries to establish and respect. But for the first time since that afternoon in 2012, when he'd closed his door in my face, I believed we could do it. We could find a way back to each other, not as we'd been before, but as something new, something healthier, something sustainable. "What time were you planning to bring Rachel and Emma over?" I asked. Michael checked his phone. "We told her we'd come get her at 10. She's at Rachel's parents' house. We didn't tell her we were coming here last night because we didn't know how it would go." It was just past 6 now. 4 hours to prepare Christmas dinner, to make my house ready for my son's family, to transform from a woman who'd spent 13 Christmases alone to a grandmother meeting her granddaughter for the first time. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like coming back to life. I sent Michael home at 7 to shower and change, and I set to work transforming my house from a shrine to absence into a home ready to welcome family. The first thing I did was take down all 13 unopened Christmas gifts from the closet and arrange them under the tree. 13 years of stubborn hope, finally about to be vindicated. Then I started cooking. I'd already done most of the preparation the night before. The ham was in the fridge. The vegetables were chopped. The pies were baked. But now I worked with new purpose, new energy. Made fresh mashed potatoes, started the green bean casserole, put the ham in the oven to warm. Set the dining room table with my good china. 4 places instead of the lonely 2 I'd been setting for over a decade. I cleaned compulsively, dusting surfaces that were already clean, straightening pictures that were already straight, nervous energy that needed somewhere to go. I changed my clothes 3 times, unable to decide what a grandmother should wear to meet her granddaughter for the first time. Finally settled on a simple green cardigan over black slacks, festive without trying too hard. At 9:45, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, gripping the sink and giving myself a stern talking to. You will not cry the moment you see them. You will not overwhelm Emma with too much emotion. You will be warm but not suffocating, interested but not invasive. You will give Rachel space to set the tone. You will remember that this is not about making up for lost time. That's impossible. This is about starting something new. The pep talk helped. A little. At 9:58, I heard the sound of a car door closing outside. My heart rate doubled instantly. I forced myself to walk, not run, to the front window, peeked through the curtains. Michael was getting out of a truck, a newer one than he'd had 13 years ago, a black Ford with a crew cab. He opened the back door and leaned in, unbuckling a car seat. When he straightened up, he was holding a little girl bundled in a purple winter coat. Emma, my granddaughter. Rachel came around from the driver's side, and I got my first real look at her. The pictures hadn't done her justice. She had a presence about her, a quiet confidence in the way she moved, the way she rested her hand on Michael's arm as he adjusted Emma's hat. They were coming up the walk now. I stepped away from the window, pressed my hand to my chest where my heart was trying to escape. This was it. This was really happening. The knock came, and this time I didn't freeze. I crossed the living room and opened the door to my son, his fiancée, and the granddaughter I'd never thought I'd meet. Emma looked exactly like her photograph, and completely different all at once. The picture hadn't captured the brightness of her eyes, the way her whole face lit up when she smiled, the energy that seemed to radiate from her small body. "Hi, Mom," Michael said softly. "This is Rachel, and this," he shifted Emma slightly, "is Emma. Emma, this is Grandma Ellie." Emma regarded me with the serious expression children sometimes get when they're processing something new and important. Then she said in a clear, sweet voice, "Daddy says you're his mommy." "That's right, sweetheart. I am." "That's weird. You're old." "Emma." Rachel's voice held gentle reprimand, but her eyes were laughing. "Remember what we talked about. What do we say when we meet new people?" "Nice to meet you," Emma recited dutifully. Then with the brutal honesty of a 3-year-old. "But she is old, Mommy." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than I could remember. "You're absolutely right, Emma. I am old. That's what happens when you're a grandma. We're all old." "Can I come inside? It's cold." "Of course, please. Come in, all of you." They filed into my house, bringing with them noise and life and a chaotic energy I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Michael set Emma down, and she immediately began exploring, running to the Christmas tree with a squeal of delight. "It's so big! Daddy, look how big!" "I see it, baby. Remember what we said about touching? Look with my eyes, not my hands." But even as she recited the rule, her fingers were already reaching toward an ornament. Rachel moved smoothly to redirect her, kneeling down to Emma's level. "Remember, this is Grandma Ellie's tree. We have to ask before we touch her things, okay?" Emma nodded solemnly, then looked at me. "Can I touch?" "You can look at all the ornaments you want, sweetheart. Some of them are very old, so we have to be gentle. But yes, you can touch." Rachel stood up and extended her hand to me. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Wright. I've heard so much about you." Her grip was firm, her smile genuine. I liked her immediately. "Please call me Ellie, or Eleanor if you prefer, but definitely not Mrs. Wright. That makes me feel ancient." "Emma already covered that," Rachel said with a grin. "Sorry about that. She's still learning about tact. She's 3. She's supposed to be honest. It's refreshing." Michael had been hanging back, watching this first meeting with an expression of hope and anxiety. I met his eyes and gave him a small nod. "It's okay. We're okay." Some of the tension left his shoulders. "Something smells amazing," Rachel said. "Can I help with anything?" "You could help me get dinner on the table. Michael, why don't you show Emma the nativity scene? She can rearrange the figures if she wants. They're baby-proof." "Actually, they're 40-year-old proof," Michael said, picking up the Mary figure with reverent care. "I used to play with these when I was a kid." "I know, that's why they're baby-proof. You survived them. I'm sure Emma will too." In the kitchen, Rachel and I worked side by side in companionable silence for a few minutes. I showed her where things were, let her take the lead on deciding what needed to be done. She moved efficiently, comfortably, like someone who spent a lot of time in kitchens. "Thank you," she said finally, as she was mashing the potatoes, "for giving him a chance. For giving us a chance. Thank you for pushing him to come back. He said it was your idea." I told him he either had to try or stop torturing himself. The guilt was eating him alive. She paused in her mashing, looked at me directly. "I need you to know, I never told him to cut you off. When we first started dating and he told me about your relationship, I suggested therapy, better boundaries, honest communication. I never suggested disappearing. I know, he told me. And even if you had suggested it, the choice was his. He's a grown man. I can't hold you responsible for his decisions." She smiled, relieved. "I was worried you might resent me, the new woman in his life who changed everything." "Did you change everything?" "I think I helped him see some things differently. Gave him permission to want things for himself. But the actual changing, he did that on his own." We carried the food to the dining room together, called Michael and Emma to the table. Emma insisted on sitting next to me, climbing into the chair with a boost from her father and immediately starting to tell me about her favorite things. "I like purple and pink and unicorns and my bunny Mr. Hoppington and macaroni and cheese and Daddy's pancakes and Mommy's songs and—" She went on like that, a stream of consciousness monologue that required no input from me beyond occasional nods and mm-hms. I sat there soaking it in, this torrent of 3-year-old enthusiasm, this unfiltered joy in sharing every thought that crossed her mind. Michael watched us with an expression I couldn't quite name. Part wonder, part relief, part something that looked almost like grief for all the moments like this we'd missed. We held hands around the table, Emma's small hand in my weathered one, and Michael said a simple grace. Thank you for this food, this day, and this family. Thank you for second chances. Amen. Amen, we echoed. Dinner was everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected. Emma was a picky eater, it turned out, pushing away the ham and green beans but happily eating roll after roll slathered with butter. Rachel gently encouraged her to try things without making it a battle, and Michael cut her food into tiny pieces and made airplane noises to get her to eat vegetables. I watched them, this family unit that had formed without me, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Joy at being here, included in this moment. Sadness for all the moments I'd missed. Gratitude that I was being given this chance. Anxiety about screwing it up. Ellie. Rachel's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Michael said you used to volunteer at the senior center? We fell into easy conversation then, about my volunteering, about Rachel's work as a bookkeeper, about the construction company Michael now co-owned with a former colleague. Normal family dinner conversation, the kind I'd thought I'd never have again. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Emma immediately zeroed in on the pile of presents under the tree. Are those all for me? She asked, eyes wide. Some of them are, I said, but some are for your daddy. One for each Christmas he missed. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Mom, you don't have to. I want to. I've been saving them for 13 years. Time to put them to use. We opened presents together, Emma tearing into the new gifts I'd bought for her, after a frantic late-night online shopping session earlier in the week. Michael carefully unwrapping 13 years of Christmas presents. The work gloves I'd bought that second year, the flannel shirt from year 11, the book about Duluth's shipbuilding industry from year 6. With each gift, his composure cracked a little more. By the time he got to the last one, a framed photograph of him and James from when Michael was about 10, working together in the garage, he was openly weeping. I thought I'd lost this picture, he said, his voice thick. When did you frame it? The first Christmas. I wanted you to have something to remember him by, to remember who you were when you were young and happy and didn't have the weight of the world on your shoulders. Michael set the frame down carefully and crossed the room, pulling me into a hug that took me completely by surprise. He held on tight, this man who was my son, and whispered against my hair, I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know, baby. I know. Emma, confused by the emotion, came over and patted Michael's leg. Why is Daddy crying? Rachel scooped her up. Because he's happy, sweetheart. Sometimes people cry when they're really happy. That's weird. Yeah, honey, it is a little weird. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the kind of easy togetherness I'd forgotten was possible. Emma played with her new toys. Rachel and I looked through old photo albums, and I told her stories about Michael's childhood. Michael sat on the floor with his daughter, building a tower of blocks, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him since he'd arrived. As the afternoon light faded and evening approached, Rachel started gathering Emma's things. We should probably get going. Emma needs dinner and bath, and we've got a long drive ahead of us. You're not staying the night? Not this time. We've got Rachel's family coming over tomorrow, and we need to get back. Michael stood up, hefted a sleepy Emma into his arms. But we'll come back, soon. Maybe next weekend? I'd like that. At the door, Rachel gave me a warm hug. This was really lovely. Thank you for welcoming us into your home. Thank you for sharing your family with me. Emma, half asleep on Michael's shoulder, lifted her head long enough to say, Bye, Grandma. I love you. The words, so casually offered by a child who'd known me all of 5 hours, hit me like a physical blow. I love you too, sweetheart. After they left, I stood in my doorway watching their taillights disappear down the street. The house felt different now, not empty, but full. Full of the lingering energy of family, of laughter and conversation, and the sweet chaos of a 3-year-old's enthusiasm. I went back inside and started cleaning up, but slowly, savoring the evidence of the day. Emma's discarded wrapping paper, the coffee cups Rachel and I had used, the photo albums still stacked on the coffee table. The nativity scene Emma had rearranged with all the wise men facing backward and the sheep on top of the stable. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Thank you for today, for everything. I love you, Mom." I typed back, "I love you too. See you next weekend." Such simple words, such enormous weight behind them. I looked around my living room, at the tree that was no longer lonely, at the stockings that now represented people who actually existed in my life, at the empty closet where 13 years of unopened gifts had sat gathering dust. It wasn't a happy ending. Happy endings implied everything was resolved, healed, perfect. This was messier than that, more complicated. There would be awkward moments ahead, difficult conversations, old wounds that would reopen unexpectedly. Michael and I had a lot of work to do to build a healthy relationship, to establish boundaries that worked for both of us. But it was a beginning. A real, genuine, hopeful beginning. And after 13 years of silence, a beginning felt like a miracle. The weeks and months that followed Christmas were a study in gradual healing, in learning how to be mother and son again without falling into the old patterns that had broken us before. True to his word, Michael came the following weekend. Just him this time. Rachel and Emma were spending the day with Rachel's family. We went to lunch at a little cafe downtown, then walked along the lakefront despite the bitter cold, talking about everything and nothing, testing the waters of this new relationship, seeing how it felt to be together again. He told me more about his therapy, both the work he'd done years ago and the sessions he'd started up again recently with Rachel as they prepared to navigate this reconciliation. Told me about the tools he'd learned for recognizing when he was taking on too much responsibility, for speaking up about his needs instead of silently resenting them going unmet. I told him about my own therapy with Dr. Chen, about the things I'd learned about codependency and empty nest syndrome, and the dangers of making one relationship the entirety of your identity. We compared notes like students studying the same subject from different textbooks. Dr. Chen said something that stuck with me, I shared, as we watched the waves crash against the shore. She said that healthy love is about wanting the other person to thrive, even if their thriving takes them away from you. Unhealthy love is about needing them to stay close to validate your own worth. Michael nodded slowly. My therapist said something similar, that I confuse taking care of you with being responsible for your happiness, that I could support you without sacrificing myself in the process. We both have a lot to learn. Yeah, but at least we're learning together this time. We established a routine over those first few months. Michael would come by himself every other Saturday, our designated just us time to work through the complicated emotions of our reunion without the distraction of other family members. On alternating weekends, he'd bring Rachel and Emma, and we'd do family things, visit the children's museum, have dinner, play in the backyard when the weather warmed up. I met Rachel's family in February, her parents, Tom and Linda, her younger sister Kelly. We all went out for dinner at the Italian restaurant on Superior Street, and I braced myself for awkwardness or judgment. Instead, Linda treated me with warm kindness, asking about my life and sharing stories about Rachel's childhood with genuine interest rather than territoriality. "We're so glad Michael found his way back to you," she told me quietly, while the others were occupied with Emma. "Family is too precious to lose over pride or stubbornness or fear." "I'm glad he found your daughter," I replied honestly. "She's been good for him, good to him. They're good for each other. That's how it should be." Emma and I developed our own special relationship. She'd started calling me Grandma Ellie without any prompting, and she insisted on FaceTiming me every few days to tell me about her day. The calls rarely lasted more than 5 minutes. 3-year-olds have short attention spans, but they became a highlight of my weeks. I started a special project for her, a hope chest handcrafted from cedar, where I'd store little treasures and mementos from her childhood. Drawings she made for me. photographs from our visits, a lock of hair from her first haircut, building the collection of memories I'd missed with Michael, determined not to miss them with his daughter. Rachel got pregnant again in April. They told me over Sunday dinner, Emma proudly announcing that she was going to be a big sister, my second grandchild, and this time I'd be here from the beginning. The thought filled me with a joy so intense it was almost painful. "We were hoping you might want to come to some of the appointments," Rachel said. "If you're interested. The ultrasounds, that sort of thing. I'd love that, if you're sure I wouldn't be intruding." "Your family, Ellie. You're not intruding." Family. The word had new weight now, new meaning. Not the suffocating closeness that had broken Michael and me before, but something healthier. Chosen and maintained, rather than assumed and taken for granted. The wedding took place in July, a simple outdoor ceremony at a pavilion overlooking Lake Superior. Emma was the flower girl, taking her duties very seriously and scattering petals with intense concentration. I sat in the front row, watching my son marry this woman who'd helped him find his way back to me, and I cried the happy tears of a mother who thought she'd never see this day. At the reception, Michael asked me to dance to a song that had been James's favorite. We swayed together on the small dance floor, and he said quietly, "I wish Dad could be here." "Me too, baby. He'd be so proud of you." "Even after everything I did?" "Especially after everything you did. Because you faced your mistakes and tried to fix them. That takes courage. Your father would recognize that." Michael's second child, a son they named James after his grandfather, was born in December, just 2 weeks before Christmas. I was there in the hospital waiting room when he arrived, holding Emma, who was both excited and confused about this new baby. When Michael came out to get us, to introduce Emma to her brother, he pulled me aside first. "Thank you for being here," he said, "for not missing this." I wouldn't have missed it for the world. We walked into that hospital room together, and I got to hold my grandson when he was less than an hour old. Got to see the wonder on Emma's face as she gently touched her brother's tiny hand. Got to witness Rachel exhausted and radiant, Michael nervous and proud, this family I'd almost lost welcoming its newest member. That Christmas, 2026, exactly 1 year after Michael had come back, we all gathered at my house again. But this time, there was no pile of unopened gifts, no years of absence to overcome. There was just family. Messy, complicated, beautiful family. Emma helped me bake cookies, getting more flour on herself than in the bowl. Michael and Rachel assembled toys on my living room floor, laughing at the incomprehensible instructions. Baby James slept in his portable bassinet by the fire, occasionally making the sweet snuffling noises newborns make. As we sat down for Christmas dinner, I looked around my table, at faces I'd once thought I'd never see again, at grandchildren I'd never expected to have, at my son who'd found his way back to me, and felt such overwhelming gratitude it took my breath away. "Before we eat," I said, "I just want to say something." They all looked at me expectantly. Emma paused mid-reach for a roll. "A year ago, I spent Christmas Eve alone. I'd spent 13 Christmases alone, actually, and I'd started to believe that's how it would always be, that I'd lost my son forever and would spend whatever years I had left in silence." My voice wavered, but I pushed on. But Michael came home, and he brought with him this beautiful family, this chance to be part of something again. And I know we still have work to do. I know it's not perfect, and there will be hard days ahead. But sitting here with all of you, I'm reminded that it's never too late. It's never too late to heal, to forgive, to start over. Michael reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thanks for not giving up on me, Mom. For leaving the door open even when I'd closed mine. That's what mothers do. We keep hoping, even when hope seems foolish." "Especially then," Rachel added softly. We held hands around the table, this patchwork family stitched together from broken pieces, and Michael said, "Grace." Thank you for second chances, for courage to face our mistakes, for love that endures even when we test it, for this food, this day, and everyone around this table. Amen. Amen, we echoed. And as we ate and talked and laughed, as Emma chattered about Santa and baby James slept peacefully, and Michael and Rachel smiled at each other with the comfortable intimacy of partners who'd weathered storms together, I understood something I hadn't before. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's not about pretending the hurt never happened or that 13 years of absence don't matter. Healing is about acknowledging the pain, understanding its roots, and choosing to move forward anyway. It's about building something new on the foundation of what was broken, something stronger because it was deliberately constructed rather than assumed. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the dinner dishes, I found myself at the kitchen window staring out at the snow-covered backyard. The lights from neighboring houses twinkled through the falling snow, and I could hear faint music from someone's Christmas party down the street. My phone buzzed. Another text from Michael. Emma wants you to know that this was the best Christmas ever. Rachel and I agree. Thank you for everything. I typed back, it was the best Christmas for me too. I love you all. As I put the phone down and returned to the dishes, I caught my reflection in the dark window glass. I looked the same as I had a year ago. Same white hair, same lined face, same weathered hands. But something fundamental had changed. There was light in my eyes that hadn't been there before, purpose in my movements, hope in my heart. I'd spent 13 years waiting for my son to come home. And when he finally did, I'd discovered that home wasn't a place or even a person. Home was this, choosing each other day after day, working through the hard things, showing up even when it was uncomfortable, loving imperfectly but persistently. Michael had come home. But more than that, we'd both found our way back to a relationship that worked for both of us. Not the codependent bond that had suffocated him before, but something healthier, something sustainable. And that, I realized, was worth every lonely Christmas, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and pain. Because those 13 years of absence had taught us both what we needed to know to make this work, had taught us the value of what we'd lost and the importance of protecting what we'd found. It was never too late to come home, never too late to heal, never too late to begin again. As I finished the dishes and turned off the kitchen light, I thought about Emma's innocent comment. Everyone should be with their mommy on Christmas. Out of the mouths of babes, they say. And maybe that 3-year-old had understood something profound that took 2 adults decades to learn. That family, in all its messy complexity, was worth fighting for, worth coming back to, worth building and rebuilding as many times as it takes. I'd gotten my son back. I'd gained a daughter-in-law, a granddaughter, a grandson. I'd been given a second chance I never thought I'd have, and I was determined not to waste it. If you've stuck with me through this whole story, I want you to know that I'm grateful. Grateful that you listened, that you understood, that you stayed to hear how it all turned out. Too often, we hear only the beginnings of stories, the conflict, the pain, the breaking. We don't always get to see the mending. But mending is just as important, maybe more important, because mending requires courage and humility and the kind of stubborn hope that refuses to accept that broken things must stay broken. I learned a lot in those 13 years apart from Michael, and I'm still learning now that he's back. I learned that you can love someone deeply and still have an unhealthy relationship with them. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go, even when it breaks your heart. I learned that healing is possible, but it requires both parties to be willing to do the hard work. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late. Never too late to change, to grow, to repair what's been damaged. Never too late to start over, to build something new from the rubble of what came before. If you're reading this and you're estranged from someone you love, I want you to know that there's hope. Maybe not hope that things will go back to how they were. They probably won't, and that might actually be for the best. But hope that something new can be built. Something healthier, something that honors both people's needs and boundaries. And if you're the one who walked away, if you're carrying the guilt of cutting someone out of your life, know that it's okay to reach out. It's okay to admit you made mistakes. It's okay to try to fix things, even if you're not sure they can be fixed. The trying matters. The courage to knock on that door, to send that text, to show up after years of silence, that matters. It took Michael 13 years to knock on my door. I won't lie and say those were easy years to get through. They weren't. They were some of the hardest years of my life. But when he finally came home, when we finally started the work of rebuilding, I discovered that all that pain had taught us something valuable. It had taught us what not to do, what to avoid, what to fight for. Now, at 76 years old, I have a life fuller than I ever imagined. I see Michael and his family regularly. I'm involved in Emma's life in ways that bring me joy without overwhelming her parents. I've met baby James's milestones from the beginning. His first smile, his first laugh, his first time sleeping through the night. I'm building relationships with my grandchildren that are mine and theirs, not filtered through their father or colored by the complicated history Michael and I share. Rachel and I have become friends in our own right. We meet for coffee sometimes, just the two of us, and talk about books and politics and our plans for the garden come spring. She asks my advice on parenting occasionally, and I try to give it carefully, respectfully, always mindful of not overstepping. Michael and I have learned to communicate better. When something bothers one of us, we say so. When we need space, we ask for it. When we need more connection, we request it. It's not always comfortable, these honest conversations about needs and boundaries, but they're necessary. They're what keep us healthy. Last month, we all took a trip together. Michael, Rachel, Emma, James, and me. Just a weekend up at a cabin on the North Shore, nothing fancy. But sitting around a campfire while Emma toasted marshmallows and baby James slept in his mother's arms and Michael told stories about fishing with his father, I felt a contentment I'd thought was lost to me forever. This is what I wanted to tell you, what I needed you to understand. Redemption is possible. Healing is possible. It won't look the way you expect, and it won't erase the pain that came before, but it's real and it's worth pursuing. If there's someone in your life you've lost, someone you miss, someone you wish you could talk to again, consider this your sign. Pick up the phone, send the text, drive to their house and knock on the door. It might not work out the way you hope. They might not be ready. The damage might be too deep to repair. But they also might answer. They might open the door. They might be waiting for you, just like I was waiting for Michael, with stubborn hope and a refusal to give up. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about a 76-year-old grandmother's journey through loss and loneliness to this unexpected, imperfect, beautiful second chapter. Now, if you enjoyed this story, if it touched you in any way, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a like. And please comment below, tell me where you're watching from, or share your own story of reconciliation if you have one. Your support helps this channel reach more people, helps more stories like mine get told. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. There are so many more stories to share, so many voices that deserve to be heard, stories of late-life empowerment, of women finding strength they didn't know they had, of second chances and new beginnings. It's never too late to come home, never too late to heal, never too late to start again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and may you find your way home, whatever that means for you.